Sometimes, history does not fade gently into the dust, but instead leaves behind a structure so impossible that it stops the breath of every careful observer. We are drawn to the margins of the ancient world, to the places where the map goes blank and the ocean begins, searching for something that feels like a secret whispered across millennia. You are standing in the heavy silence of the Gujarat plain, staring at a colossal brick basin carved into the earth nearly 4,000 years ago. The heat rises from the baked soil, distorting the air above a rectangular void that should not exist in an era we have long dismissed as primitive. This is Lothal, the so-called Mound of the Dead, yet in its prime it pulsed with a lifeblood of water, commerce, and a complex faith we can only partially grasp. They called it the Sacred City, a place where the river's spirit married human ingenuity, but its deepest identity remains locked inside fire-cracked bricks and stubborn silence. The year was 1954, when the Archaeological Survey of India began scraping away the alluvial blanket that had hidden Lothal for 2,000 years. The bricks are not haphazard rubble, but precision-cut modules, fitted with an invisible joint so fine that even a knife blade cannot slip between them after 40 centuries. This was not a desperate attempt to tame nature. It was a calibrated, almost arrogant assertion of cosmic order upon the chaotic floodplains of the ancient Saraswati system. The mainstream narrative of the Indus Valley civilization often fixates on the vast grid cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, yet Lothal offers a very different kind of enigma. Here, the mystery is not merely the size of the city, but the function of its heart, that vast trapezoidal basin measuring 218 meters in length along its central axis. From the air, it resembles a colossal keyhole, or perhaps a giant stairwell descending into the dark water table, an architecture built for something far grander than mere survival. When you walk the eroded rim today, the mind instinctively fights to reconcile the crumbling edges with the sheer scale of the maritime ambition these walls once contained. To understand the anomaly, we must first feel the rhythm of the city that encircled this water, a meticulously planned landscape divided into the citadel and the lower town. The Acropolis rose to the southeast, a baked brick plateau where the ruling elite and the ritual specialists likely watched over the comings and goings of the Great Basin. Here, the streets were not organic cowpaths, but mathematical corridors, straight and somber, equipped with covered drains that would shame the sanitation systems of many later empires. The lower town unfurled to the north, a crowded labyrinth of artisan quarters, bead factories, and copper workshops forever coated in the ghostly dust of micro-drilled carnelian. Lothal's beadmakers achieved a technical brilliance that borders on the unbelievable, drilling holes finer than a human hair through semi-precious stones using nothing but hardened jasper-tipped borers. They produced agate barrels of impossible uniformity, microbeads of gold and steatite seals etched with creatures that do not exist in any terrestrial zoology. A complete warehouse was discovered near the dockyard, its floor still scarred by the circular impressions of massive storage jars that once sealed away aromatic oils and exotic export goods. But it is the dock itself, the great enclosure, that channels the primary current of our awe and our confusion. The walls are an astounding 4 to 5 meters thick in places, constructed with millions of kiln-fired bricks set in a mud brick matrix to hold back the immense pressure of waterlogged earth. A magnificent inlet channel, over 200 meters long, once connected the enclosed basin to the ancient course of the Sabarmati River, and from there to the primal expanse of the Arabian Sea. There is a spillway, a precise engineered gap in the southern wall, designed to discharge excess monsoon water and prevent the dock from ripping itself apart during the seasonal floods. It is a hydraulic masterpiece. Yet this is precisely where the labyrinth of interpretation begins, and the cold, hard evidence starts to fracture under the weight of academic debate. The orthodox theory, championed by its excavator, portrays Lothal as the earliest known maritime dock in the world, a lock-gated harbor servicing trading vessels from Mesopotamia. If true, this basin witnessed the very first splash of the monsoon tide against a man-made seawall, positioning Lothal as the pivotal link between the Indus grain belt and the copper ores of Oman. But a darker hypothesis, whispered through the halls of archaeology, suggests that the inlet channel was never deep enough to carry the draft of a seagoing vessel. Some researchers theorize that the so-called dock was actually an immense irrigation tank, a sacred body of stagnant water designed to nourish the double cropping of wheat and barley in the hinterland. Where the romantic imagines a mast creaking under the weight of a foreign sail, the skeptic sees a sluice gate regulating the cold, dark blood of agriculture. A third voice, more unsettling still, connects the basin not to commerce or food, but to a ritual cleansing, a watery mirror reflecting a sky full of gods we have long forgotten. Perhaps the distinction between a dock and a temple tank is an illusion our rigid modern minds impose upon a civilization that saw no boundary between the sacred flow of rivers and the pragmatic flow of goods. As you stare into the dried basin, the silence becomes a cacophony of lost possibilities, each rustling leaf a potential answer that crumbles the moment you try to hold it. The artifact unearthed here do not scream a clear answer, but instead whisper conflicting clues like a Persian Gulf seal found near a ritual fire altar, or a terracotta model of a boat resting beside a mother goddess figurine. There was a fire cult here, or perhaps a water cult, or a synthesis so complex that it unified the opposing elements into a single, ineffable devotion to the cycle of renewal. The graves tell a much gentler story. Extended bodies lying north-south, accompanied by simple pots, copper mirrors, and the eternal companionship of a bead necklace resting silent against the cervical vertebrae. There is no evidence of the extravagant royal tombs that define Egypt or Mesopotamia, just a quiet, egalitarian dissolution back into the alluvium that birthed them. And then, somewhere around 1900 years before the birth of Christ, the pulse of Lothal stopped. The brick kilns went cold, the dock channel silted into an unrecognizable sliver of mud, and the precise drainage channels clogged with the debris of a dying world. The official narrative points to geological uplift and catastrophic floods, the same violent tectonics that eventually choked the life from the great Saraswati River itself. Some researchers theorize that a massive storm surge surged up the Gulf of Cambay, overfilling the spillway and turning the dock into a stagnant, malarial swamp that bred only pestilence. Where archaeology faltered, local legend began to fill the silence, whispering of a city founded by a sage named Lothal, who was consumed by a grief so profound that the ground swallowed his curse. We hold these tiny carved stones in our hands, bearing the image of a unicorn bull, a banyan tree, or a man in a horned headdress, and the letters beneath them remain a locked door. No Rosetta Stone has emerged from the silt of the Indus, leaving us in the excruciating position of reading a city's body language, while the voice of its soul remains utterly silent. We know the precise length of their bricks, the brilliance of their gemstone drills, and the exact ratio of copper to tin in their spearheads, but we do not know if they died in terror or in prayer. This profound disconnect between material mastery and linguistic darkness is the true labyrinth of Lothal. You can stand in the beadmaker's workshop, feeling the phantom vibration of a bow drill that stopped spinning 4 millennia ago. And yet you cannot ask the artisan a single question. A darker hypothesis suggests that the so-called priest king of the Indus did not rule through military force, but through the terrifying control of tidal calendars and irrigation rituals. Perhaps the dock was the clock, a watery computer where the ingress of the brackish tide dictated when the entire city planted, harvested, or offered sacrifices to the serpentine deities of the deep. If the rhythm of the tide failed, or if the river violently shifted away, the entire political and spiritual authority of the citadel would have evaporated overnight. And so the city was not destroyed. It was simply rendered irrelevant, a slow exodus of souls migrating toward the Ganges plain, carrying only their gene memory and the heavy weight of a dead god. The human element of Lothal does not manifest in named conquerors or carved vanities of power, but in the anonymous obsessions of the modern seekers. 4,600 years after its foundation, archaeologist after archaeologist has brushed the dust from a thin wall, convinced they were about to find the door that separates legend from hard fact. There is a specific kind of madness that takes hold of a mind staring at a perfect brick alignment, a desperation to prove that this basin floated wooden masts rather than just mirroring the monsoon sky. Every field season, the monsoon returns to Lothal, trying to re-swallow what remains, and the excavators fight a losing war against the relentless green grip of the weeds and the salt creep. The local villagers watch from the shade of acacia trees, their oral traditions seamlessly merging the archaeological site with the mythic aura of a vanished golden age that blends effortlessly into the Ramayana. They speak of Lothal as a place not of dead traders, but of sleeping spirits, a port that still wakes in the deepest hour of the night when the only light is the cold phosphorescence of a planetary alignment. For those who seek the truth, the site confesses nothing easily. It produces a potsherd today, a copper fishhook tomorrow, and keeps the ultimate narrative locked away in the magnetized clay of the deep strata. We are forced to admit that our certainty about the dock's function is a fragile construct, a desperate imposition of a Western economic model onto a society that might have operated on a purely ritualistic logic of reciprocity. When you look into the vitrified remains of the warehouse, where the heat of a final conflagration turned grain into blackened glass, you feel the specific claustrophobic terror of the cities last night. Was it an accident, a sacked city, or a ritual self-immolation, a voluntary return of the goods to the fire that forged them in a final act of apocalyptic purification? Possibility that a civilization could choose to erase itself, to burn its surplus in defiance of a collapsing cosmic cycle, is a thought that chills the spine far more effectively than any external invasion narrative. We once clung to the easy answer of the Aryan hordes riding down from the steppe to crush the peaceful Dravidian traders, but the bones at Lothal bear no marks of swords. Instead, the enemy was invisible, a shift in the monsoon belt, a tectonic spasm that lifted the old port beyond the reach of the tide, and the migration of a river that decided, with the finality of a god, to turn its back on the city. The human obsession with Lothal lies not in the grandeur of its monuments, for there are no pyramids here, but in the disquieting familiarity of its failure. We look at the flooded dock or the dried tank, and we see our own coastal metropolises, our own fragile supply chains, and our own absolute dependence on a stable climate and a predictable sea level. The beadmaker did not die because he lacked skill. His hands could manipulate a millimeter of space with more precision than a modern laser. He died because the river left and the ships stopped coming. This is the existential dread that Lothal inflicts upon the modern listener. The realization that complexity is not resilience, and that a highly specialized, interconnected system can collapse into a ghost settlement within 3 generations. The ghosts of Lothal are not phantoms. They are the absent voices of the children who stopped playing in the lower town squares, the merchants who abandoned their perfect stone waits, and the priests who stared into the empty basin until the reflection showed only dust. Some researchers have spent their entire academic lives fighting for a single interpretation of this ancient dockyard, and their intellectual blood has soaked into the very soil of the site. The debate between the maritime dock and the irrigation tank is not just a dry academic spat. It is a profound psychological struggle over whether we define this culture by its reach toward the horizon or by its roots in the dark, nourishing mud. If Lothal went to sea, it represents the adventurous, outward-facing child of the Bronze Age, pushing the boundaries of the known world toward the Persian Gulf. But if Lothal merely farmed the floodplain, it becomes a cautionary fable of insular perfection, a closed-loop system that burned itself out in a cycle of repetitive ritual and diminishing returns. Yet the most incisive minds have learned to embrace the ambiguity, to see that the very tension between the dock and the tank is the mechanism that keeps the memory of Lothal alive. It is the not knowing that keeps drawing you back, that forces the imagination to fill the basin with both the splash of a trade barge and the serene glint of the harvest moon on a sacred reservoir. This dual reality is the city's greatest gift and its most durable curse. It exists in a quantum state, a superposition of sailor and farmer, forever slipping out of the net of our definitive classifications. As the sun melts into the Arabian Sea 100 kilometers to the southwest, the firing holes in the brick vitrify into points of orange light, and the entire dockyard looks like a smoldering sacrificial altar. In that fading luminescence, you understand why they called it the sacred city. The boundary between utilitarian labor and divine offering was likely so thin as to be invisible to their waking eyes. The shadow of the old Acropolis stretches toward the chasm of the dock, and you can almost hear the faint, rhythmic beat of a stone-weighted timber drill, mixed with the chanted hymn of a dockworker loading a cargo that will never be delivered. We travel to Lothal to measure bricks and draw stratigraphic profiles, but we leave carrying a far heavier cargo of unanswerable questions about the nature of memory and the fragility of language. There is a comfort in believing history is a solved puzzle, an inevitable march toward the present, until you stand at the edge of this silence and realize that entire worlds can vanish without leaving a single intelligible goodbye. Time, which we treat as a gentle restorer of truth, acts more like a relentless engine of erosion here, grinding down the sharp edges of the dock until they mimic the natural contour of a dry river bend. If we ever crack that code, the dock might finally confess its true purpose, and the poetry of the mystery might be replaced by the dull prose of a tax record or a ship manifest. And yet, some fires are meant to remain unread. Some waters are meant to remain unfathomably still, because the space they leave in our comprehension is the very engine of our wonder. The abyss of the past is not a void. It is held in the specific arrangement of these 4,100-year-old bricks, a mirror that reflects not the ancient world, but the terrifying limitations of our modern sight. the ancient dockyard, or the sacred tank, or whatever this structure truly was, will not yield to our digital scans or our geoarchaeological drills. It holds its secret the way the ocean holds a sunken hull down in the cold, anaerobic darkness where the pressure forbids our descent. The dock of Lothal is now a weather-beaten sundial, marking not the hours of trade, but the millennia of our profound, persistent, and beautiful ignorance. Perhaps the final lesson of the sacred city is that we do not need to decode a civilization to respect its gravity, that the weight of its silence is evidence enough of a monumental complexity. In the end, the story of Lothal is the eternal human story of a relationship with water, the desire to channel it, to float upon it, to be cleansed by it, and ultimately to be devoured by it. And as the last light drains from the sky and the stars switch on one by one above the dry basin, you are left with the ghost of a ripple spreading across a vanished surface. The Indus flowed here, a ship might have sailed here, and then the silence fell, a silence that is not empty, but full of all the songs we will never hear.